Welcome to Tech for Good with Bethnal Green Ventures. I'm Paul Miller, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Tessa Clarke, co-founder and CEO of Olio. Olio is one of the most well-known Tech for Good startups to come out of the UK, building a global platform that helps people share surplus food, reduce waste, also strengthening local communities. What's particularly interesting about Olio is not just the idea, but the scale it's reached, and the challenge of turning a mission-driven product into something that works commercially and operationally at that scale. So Tessa, it's great to have you on the show.
Great to be with you.
So to start off, explain what Olio does today and how that's evolved from the original idea.
Yeah, so Olio exists to tackle the enormous problem of waste in our homes and local communities. And our simple insight really is that no one likes wasting things, but the reason why we do is because we are no longer connected to our local communities. So Olio harnesses the power of mobile technology to reconnect us with our immediate neighbourhood. And how the app works is if you've got some spare food, so perhaps you've overcated for a party, you're going away for a weekend, or you've ordered in when you should have eaten what was in your fridge, you can just snap a photo and add that item to the app. Neighbours living nearby get an alert, they can browse the listings, request what they want, and pop round to pick it up. And in terms of our evolution, Olio originally was envisioned purely as a food sharing app for neighbour-to-neighbour food sharing. But one of the challenges that we encountered very early on was that our early adopters hated food waste, therefore they didn't generate any, therefore they didn't have any food to put on the app. So whilst people sort of downloaded the app in their droves, we didn't actually have any food on it. And so that led to our Food Waste Heroes program, where today we have over 100,000 food safety trained volunteers. So these are members of our community who hate food waste, don't generate any in their homes, but would love to rescue surplus food from businesses near them. So that was definitely a major evolution of the product. And that's where the vast majority of the food coming onto the platform comes from. And then also very early on, we saw that our community were adding household items to the app, because the demand for Olio has always been really, really high. So a typical food listing is requested in less than 30 minutes of being added to the app. And so people thought, well, this works really well for giving away my spare food. I'm decluttering the kids' playroom. I've got that random bottle of shampoo I used twice that didn't work particularly well. Shower head, I always remember that one very vividly from the early days. And in the beginning, when all that stuff started coming onto the app, I would be on the back end of the platform deleting it. And then I just thought, this is crazy. Why am I spending all my time deleting this? These are items that shouldn't be going to waste. I don't know where else anyone can easily give them away and not feel a bit weird about doing it. So we then created a non-food section in the app. And actually, for most people, that's where they spend most of their time on Olio. Most people are using Olio to give away or to pick up free household items.
Oh, amazing. So give us a bit of an idea of the scale of it now. So, what are the key numbers, if you like?
Yeah. So to date, we've had just over 9 million people join the Olio community, 5 million of whom are in the UK. And each month we have over 1 million listings added to the app. That's about 5 or 6 million individual items. And we have within the UK roughly £5 million worth of food given away for free via the platform each month, and between £1 and £2 million worth of household items.
You have gone beyond the UK as well. So how's that working?
So
what other countries are into Olio?
So we've had items not just added to the app, but successfully shared in over 60 countries so far. And that has happened very organically, although we've sort of lent into that. So we have something called our Ambassadors Programme. We have over 50,000 people around the world who are passionate about our mission. They want to be able to use Olio, but they recognise that in order to do so, they've got to get their local community onto the app as well. And so we give people posters and letters and flyers that they can download. We give them digital material that they can spread the word amongst their digital networks. And so that is how Olio has very much kind of grown internationally to date. Roughly 85% of the volume of transactions that's happening on the app are taking place in the UK, and it's about 15% outside of the UK. We as a team have been very, very focused on the core UK business, but now we're actually actively having conversations underway with a number of large grocery retailers in different markets, and are looking to really double down on Olio's international expansion. Some of our most active markets are not necessarily the ones that you would expect, actually. So Singapore, for example, is somewhere where we have just over 200,000 people who are part of the Olio community. Olio is extremely active there. Then also we've got a number of Latin American countries, so Colombia, Mexico, Chile, Argentina, And then I saw a lovely LinkedIn post the other day, actually, someone in, I think it was Amsterdam, was raving about using Olio to declutter her home. So, yeah, we're happening in lots of pockets of communities all over the world.
And I mean, getting to that sort of scale, the millions of people, millions of items going through the platform. I mean, not all tech for good startups get to that stage. What do you think? What do you put that success down to? Going from those early users up to that scale of millions. What were the key moments along that journey?
Well, I'd love to say that there have been some silver bullets along the way, but I think that's probably one of our major learnings is there is no such thing as a silver bullet. And for your own emotional, mental sanity, you should stop looking for silver bullets. We certainly spent far too many hours in the early years thinking that sort of the next product launch or the next marketing campaign or the next partnership was going to be this sort of silver bullet. And actually, that hasn't really happened to us. We've been very much a steady, distant growth type stories, not necessarily particularly glamorous. I do think perhaps the biggest unlock for us was when we started our partnership with Tesco. And so prior to that, we started off, and I think this is a really important learning, which is sort of start small and work your way up to the big fish. So we started off with the Food Waste Heroes program, where I said we've got those volunteers who collect surplus food from their nearby stores and give it away for free to their local community via the app. Started off with a couple of corner stores in North London. Then we expanded to Planet Organic, who I think at the time had 7 stores. Then I can remember sort of capturing Pret-a-Manger with 100 stores. So that was really exciting. It was really when we rolled out with Tesco across their 2,700 stores. That really was a massive moment of expansion for us. And again, one of the learnings there was it took us 3.5 years to close that Tesco deal from sort of initial conversation to actual rollout. And in our experience, those very, very long sales cycles have been entirely typical. We had perhaps naively hoped that once we signed up Tesco, everyone else would fall in line and join Olio as well. But actually, we've had another very large retailer. It took us 6 years to get them signed up. We've got one we're talking to right now who we've been speaking to kind of on and off over 8 years. So the sales cycles can be extremely long and painful. Just sort of persistence and resilience have definitely been crucial factors along that journey. And then the other surprising thing is, we learned this through Tesco, when you spend sort of 3.5 years building up towards something, you then perhaps incorrectly assume that kind of the rollout is something that will be equally long and painful, but it was the absolute opposite. We experienced a massive whiplash effect where they suddenly were like, right, we want you to be rolled out within 3 months across almost 3,000 stores. So once you get the go ahead, it really is sort of full steam ahead.
It's really interesting business from that perspective, in that you've got these two different groups that you're working with. You've got big businesses on one hand and then the individuals.
Yes.
From a sort of strategy and how you spend your time and how you do your messaging perspective, is it hard to keep those two things in mind at the same time, or do you have a way of keeping them separated, as it were?
It is hard, but essential. And we definitely, I guess, if you, those circus riders who canter around the circus with one leg on each pony, we are very much like that. We sort of straddle the large corporate clients and then equally our very, very passionate grassroots community and in particular our volunteers. One of the major learnings around managing the relationship with the community is not underestimate how committed and how passionate and how personally involved they feel with Olio and our mission. And so they hold us to incredibly high standards, because when they are out spreading the word about Olio on our behalf and their local communities, they feel like this is their personal identity on the line. And so anytime we don't live up to their high standards, we're almost kind of knocking their personal identity, and they take that very, very seriously. One of the most important lessons is to make sure that you are really proactive with your communications, that you over communicate, and you don't anchor your communications just in the what, because lots of businesses tend to say, I want to communicate this, and it's the what. We are launching X, we are doing Y. But what we've learned is that our community really wants to understand the why, the reasoning, the rationale behind what you're doing. And anytime we've failed to go into the detail of the why, that's when we've really tripped up, and sometimes we've had a really strong community backlash. So I'm a farmer's daughter, which means that I grew up working incredibly hard on our family farm, growing and producing food. As a result, food waste was totally criminal through my childhood. And that meant that I was not prepared to throw perfectly good food in the bin when the removal men asked me to do so just over 10 years ago. And I went out onto the streets to try and find someone to give my food to, failed miserably and thought, why isn't there an app for this? Because I've been working in the digital space for a decade. And that mission of sort of solving the problem of food waste at scale was the initial spark, I guess, that created Olio and is still alive and well in us today. And that has been a really important part of our success. It's what attracts not just our community to Olio, but really high caliber employees as well. I think the most challenging part of the relationship with our community has not been around the mission, but when the community really cares about their own personal experience and they want that to be as good as possible, and we're trading that off versus scale and impact at scale. And so our community might get quite frustrated with us. Why have you not fixed this problem? Why have you not solved this bug for me? Why do I have to do this many taps here when I don't want to have to? Whilst we're busy rolling out new features or rolling out new marketing campaigns. And so that is the tension that we most frequently encounter. And we've really had to take the community on a journey of teaching them what it's like to sort of run a business. Because, for example, they will get furious that we're running a marketing campaign about X and we haven't solved their particular problem about Y. And then we have to explain, well, we have different people in the organization who work on different things and we can't just move people around. Engineers can't sort of launch marketing campaigns and marketeers can't do coding, etc. Well, that was in a pre-AI world, so maybe that's changing a little bit. But you kind of get the point. So that's been the main source of conflict, I would say, in our community. And generally, people are very resistant to change. So they want everything to stay exactly how it was when they first joined it and not super happy or comfortable with us bringing on lots of new people.
And looking back, are there any of those decisions along the way where the whole business could have gone in a different direction, if you like? Were there any times or moments in the history of the business where, key moments, if you like, inflection points where you had to make a decision in one way or another that has led to it being the way it is now, but it could have gone in a different direction?
I don't really think so, sort of within our own control. And the reason for that being that we are constantly testing and experimenting. So our sort of history of quote unquote failures is enormous. You could have multiple books written on those, but we really don't dwell on that at all. We're just experimenting as quickly as we can, learning as quickly as we can. So it's fairly obvious to us that if we've done a quick, dirty experiment, it didn't work, we're not going to go off down that path. So the right path to us has always been fairly clear. We did have what felt like it might be a major inflection point when we were approached by a sovereign wealth fund in the UAE a couple of years ago, and they wanted to bring Olio to the UAE. And there was sort of a big potential commercial deal on the table, and for a whole variety of reasons that sort of didn't go ahead. There were reasons sort of beyond our control. So if that had gone ahead, that feels like that could have been a major turning point in terms of our internationalization and our strategy around that. But no, other than that, the most, I guess, the decisions that we've had to take internally that have impacted our trajectory have sadly been around needing to restructure the organization in response to all the various wars and macroeconomic meltdowns that we have had. And we've always been very swift to respond to macroeconomic changes. I think because our mission is so important, we can't afford to fail. Failure, Sasha and I are super clear that kind of failure of the overall Olio mission is just not an option. So that means that we have been quite prudent with regards to finances and runway and stuff like that.
It's an interesting angle on it as well, because obviously you've raised quite a lot of investment over the time in terms of what do you think it is that's really appealed to investors about Olio? What's been the investment story for you?
So I should say that fundraising has been deeply challenging for us. We're a female co-founded tech for good. For much of the time, we were pre-revenue, then early revenue business. So as I'm sure you can imagine, we didn't exactly have investors queuing out the door, but we did succeed in raising multiple rounds of financing. And I think there are a couple of things that attracted our investors to the business. The first was just the sheer scale of the problem that we are trying to solve and the fact that it has not been solved. It definitely needs to be solved. So there was a kind of enormous TAM there. And then those investors were backing myself and Sasha as founders and the team that we had built around us to unlock that opportunity. And I think one of the major learnings that we have had is that we were very early to market in terms of identifying that food waste was a problem that needs to be solved. And arguably, even a decade later, very little progress has been made in truly recognising at a national level, and certainly not an international level, that food waste is one of the biggest challenges facing humanity today, and it desperately needs solving for a whole variety of reasons, not just the environmental impact that food waste is having, but also the enormous missed social impact. I am sort of quietly hopeful that in the massive geopolitical uncertainty that's consuming us all right now, and with the Strait of Hormuz being blockaded and that impacting a third of the world's fertilizer supply, I do think that this will raise up the agenda, food security for many countries, and they will start to realise that food waste has always been wrong, but it's sort of even more detrimental in a world where food security is increasingly difficult to achieve. So it's kind of a shame that it takes something like this to get us to wake up and stop wasting the most precious resources that we have. But I'm hopeful that maybe now, finally, the world will wake up to the sheer scale of the problem of food waste and get serious about solving it.
Have you found it different working with impact investors as opposed to sort of more mainstream investors, if you like? Do you have to tell a different story, and how have they worked well alongside each other, or are all your investors on board with the impact side of things?
Yeah. So again, I'll go back to the analogy of the person riding the two circus ponies. I can remember very clearly around about our Series A. Prior to the Series A, we had got a couple of sort of traditional institutional investors and we had got a bunch of impact investors. And I can remember thinking, oh gosh, do I need to sort of get off of these two ponies and double down on just one of them? And the course that we decided to chart was actually, no, keep a foot on both ponies. Served us incredibly well. I would say that within the traditional commercial investors, we have selected people who are absolutely obsessed by our mission. And within the impact investors, we've got very commercial impact investors. So these are, what I've learned is that there are different types of impact investors. So there's some people who invest for impact and they expect lower returns. There are some people who invest for impact and they want market returns. And there are some people who invest for impact and believe that they're going to get outsized returns because ultimately sort of that's where the whole world is going to. I agree with that latter thesis, and they're the types of impact investors that we have got. So we spend our time in the boardroom and in the conversations I have with our investors just focused on the core sort of commercials and operations of the business, because the impact is just so patently obvious, and it just spins off of scale. So commercial and impact are in total lockstep for us due to the nature of our business model. The more listings we get on the app, the more food and household items we're saving, so the more impact we're having, and we get paid by businesses to take away their surplus, which is what generates all those extra listings. So we're broadly very aligned there.
That's great. And other things you've learned about the way you measure and talk about your impact over time,
Yeah.
I guess as you've scaled.
Yeah.
Because I think it's a fantastic example of the business, because you're always on the numbers. The numbers are always out there in terms of how much food waste has been avoided and all those kinds of things. But what have you learned over time about how to measure and talk about your impact?
So what we've learned around the measurement piece is to be really stage appropriate. So in the very early days, we did not measure our sort of impact as such. I had no idea how much carbon we were avoiding from going to waste, how much water we were saving, etc., because it was just so obvious that through saving food, we were having a positive environmental impact. And when you're a tiny team, you can't afford to allocate resources to try and do that not entirely straightforward impact measurement. But as we have scaled the organisation, we've invested more and more time in making our impact measurement more and more. So we've definitely been on a journey. Our impact measurement even now is not perfect. It's far from it. It could be a lot more granular than it is. But right now, I feel that it's entirely stage appropriate. It's not at all misleading. And that's a great place for us to be. So I think even though you're an impact business, you need to be really careful not to allocate disproportionate resources trying to calculate your impact, because you could calculate your impact perfectly, but if you're not growing and scaling, you'll be dead, and therefore there won't be much impact. In terms of how we communicate about our impact, when Sasha and I co-founded Olio, as founders, we were really driven by the environmental impact, the environmental travesty that is food waste. And so we communicated through a climate lens. What we have learned the hard way is that actually people resonate much better when you lead with the human impact rather than the environmental impact. So in our case, what that means is talking about the number of families that we have fed. It's about sharing back user testimonials. And that applies not just for encouraging individuals in their home to take the 10 seconds that it requires to add a listing to the app, but also in converting corporate clients. At the end of the day, people who work at a business are human beings too. And they have been much more motivated with the messaging of make sure your surplus food is feeding families, in brackets, especially during a cost of living crisis. And then the environmental impact is absolutely, of course, we'll report on that. That's helpful for their ESG reporting, but it's much more the icing on the cake rather than the cake itself.
Fantastic. Yeah. And so let's talk a little bit about the team and the culture of the company that you've built.
Yeah.
So I hadn't realized until you told me just before we started that you're an entirely virtual team, as in
Yes.
you don't have, there is no Olio office as far as I understand it. Tell us a little bit about how the culture that you've built around.
So actually the remote first approach has been really pivotal in terms of building the culture that we've got today. And it came out of necessity, and we started it 5 years before COVID even hit. And for those first 5 years, it was our sort of dirty little secret because no one believed, Sasha and I, that we could possibly build a business that was entirely virtual. And that came about because we both had young children. We lived in different locations than one another. So we didn't have the time nor the money or the inclination to commute to an office that we couldn't afford and didn't want to be in. So it was fairly obvious and we knew that the tools were more than fit for purpose. So when we was just the two of us, we were sort of remote first. Then when it came to making our first hires, we didn't see any reason why we couldn't recruit from outside of London, essentially. And we also knew that certainly sort of back then, our first couple of hires were developers. And developers outside of London were 30% cheaper than developers in London, and were just as good, if not better. So for us, it was a fairly obvious choice to sort of keep on building the organisation as a remote first business. A couple of things that we've done to ensure that we've got a really strong culture, and we have an exceptionally strong culture. And I know me saying that as the co-founder might seem a little partisan, but we do measure it twice a year through our employee satisfaction survey, and all of our scores are kind of 8.5 plus. So very, very low staff turnover as well. I think some of the key ingredients for that have been, first of all, everybody is recruited to join Olio, not just if they're mission aligned, they have to be mission obsessed. And that is a much higher bar. And we've never dropped that. And that's really important. So everyone just has that same degree of energy, and we're all kind of rowing with the same pace and intensity in the same direction. Then the second thing we do is we make sure that we recruit people who really do exemplify our company values. And we've just got 4 of them. So they are inclusive, resourceful, caring, and ambitious. And every person who joins the company in their final presentation actually has to present to each of those values, and they can pick examples from either their professional life or their personal life that show how they live up to those values. And even though we don't have those values on mouse mats or posts on the wall or mugs, they are really, really ingrained in the company. So we do all of our 360 performance feedback on the basis of those values. We get everyone to assess ourselves as an organisation, how well we're living those values. We use them when we're taking operational decisions, and they really do shape how we kind of show up on a day-to-day basis.
Amazing. So just finally, really, I wanted to talk about some advice you might have for Tech for Good founders who are just starting out on the journey. You know, thinking back over all the things that you've learned, are there things that you would have done differently, or pieces of advice that you've learned the hard way that you would like to pass on to the next group of Tech for Good founders?
Well, I'll start with the sort of really uplifting, optimistic bit, which is personally, I found it absolutely game changing, waking up every single day, doing work with purpose, knowing that what you're doing is making a difference, knowing that you are trying to be part of the solution, not the problem. And that is just phenomenal for your own mental health and well-being. It's totally, totally game changing. So I really recommend everyone to stick to it if you are thinking about or doing work with purpose. Other sort of, I guess, words of advice would be to actually very early on, I read the book called The Lean Startup by Eric Ries, and I really recommend every founder read that book because the ability to sort of test, measure and learn as quickly as possible, I think is absolutely crucial for success. And it goes quite counter to most of our human nature, which is we tend to want to sort of lock ourselves away and perfect something and then do a great reveal. You very quickly learn that, as I've said, there's no such thing as a silver bullet. The great reveal is not a big deal because no one is sat there waiting for what your little startup is going to reveal at all. And so you just need to crack on and be experimenting as quickly as possible. The other thing I would say is you do go through these periods of just the dark, long, where it just feels like nothing is going your way, nothing is going right. And having been through more of those than I can count now, kind of 10 years in, one thing I've learned is that there is always something good around the corner. Generally, you've just got to hang in there for a couple of weeks and sort of calm as real. It's a thing. It means that there's something good for you just around the corner, but really important. You don't just sit there sort of waiting for good stuff to happen. Of course, you need to keep testing and experimenting. You need to be humble. You need to learn. But if you do all of those things and stay really obsessed on your mission, not your solution. Again, I think that's a mistake a lot of people make. They fall in love with their solution. You need to be completely agnostic about your solution, but really, really religious about your mission. And if you do that, then you will iterate your way to the right solution to fulfill your mission.
Amazing. Well, Tessa, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been great to hear more about Olio and what you've built. So yeah, if you're listening and have suggestions for guests or topics, do get in touch. And if you're building a tech for good startup and looking for early stage investment, you can learn more about BGV at bethnalgreenventures.com. That's it for today. Thanks for listening.